Hello and welcome to the My School channel. My name is Angela, and in this video we're going to continue the government topic by topic video lesson. So we're moving on to a new topic, institutions of government in post-independence Nigeria. So here we're going to discuss the various institutions and the various organs of government that helps day-to-day operation flow smoothly in post-independence Nigeria. So please stay with us, don't go anywhere, we'll be right back. Welcome back to my school channel. Like I said earlier, we're moving on to institutions of government in post-independence Nigeria. So let's dive right into it. So here are a list of the things that we're going to discuss in this video lesson. We're going to discuss the definition of the institutions of government. So we're going to do a recap of the organs of government as we've discussed in the previous video lesson. Then we're going to move on to the executive, legislature, and judiciary and discuss the structure at the various tiers and their functions, as well as the challenges faced by each of these different organs of government. So let's begin with a definition of the institutions of government. So institutions of government are the formal structures and bodies that have the legal and constitutional authority to make, implement, interpret, and enforce laws within a state. So when we're talking about institutions, we're talking about those structures that have already been established in a society that helps to perform all of these three functions of government. Remember, we have three organs of government: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. So all of the functions that they are meant to perform are performed by these actual structures that have been put in place. Let's move on to the next slide. So these institutions are built on the tripartite system inherited from both British colonial rule and post-independence Republican ideals. So we inherited that division into the three organs of government: the legislature, the executive, and judiciary, from the British colonial administration. We also learned a lot from the Republican ideals that have been enforced in so many different democratic societies of the world, the United States of America, for example. So we continue to use these three organs of government to govern the administration of the nation. So the legislature is responsible for making laws. They are the law-making body. The executive is responsible for implementing those laws that have been made by the legislature, while the judiciary is responsible for interpreting those laws, ensuring that everybody abides by the laws that have been made and implemented by the legislature and the executive. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, so here are the three organs of government. Like we said earlier, the executive is responsible for implementing the law, legislature is responsible for lawmaking, and the judiciary is responsible for the interpretation of the law. Let's move on to the next slide. So apart from these three functions, there are other functions that each of these three different organs of government perform. The executive, for example, is also responsible for the formulation and implementation of policies. Policies are those things that guide the activities of the executive. There are certain things that are meant to be present in a particular society, and the executive makes and implements policies to ensure that these things are available for the citizens. We're talking about social amenities, those different things that the citizens need in their day-to-day life to perform their businesses in the society. Those things are provided for by the formulation and implementation of policies. They are also responsible for administering public services. There are certain services that we need, and so there are certain officials that are put in place to ensure those services are provided to the citizens. They are also responsible for managing the economy and also national security. They ensure that there are certain policies that are put in place to ensure that the economy continues to run smoothly. They ensure that there are certain security officials that are put in place to defend the country against external aggression and to ensure there is law and order within the country. They are also responsible for diplomacy and international relations. They create foreign policies to ensure that we are able to have a good relationship with our neighbors and with other nations of the world. Then the other functions of the legislature includes the approval of budgets. So the budget that has been made by the executive is approved by the legislature to ensure that there is a measure of checks and balances within the society. They are also responsible for oversight of executive activities. They ensure that the executive do not go past the responsibilities that have been assigned to them. So if they are found guilty of fraud or mismanagement of the funds that have been approved, the legislature is responsible for overseeing these things and ensuring that the appropriate punishment is meted out to members of the executive. They are also responsible for representation of the people's interests. They ensure that the interests of the people in the various constituencies are represented in the National Assembly. Then they are also responsible for constitutional revision and amendments. When they feel like there are certain things within the Constitution that are outdated, they try to revise these various items and to ensure that it's up to standard, it continues to serve the people of the country. Then other functions of the judiciary includes the adjudication of legal disputes. So the judiciary is responsible for ensuring that when there is a dispute between two different individuals, between individuals and organizations, between two organizations, between individuals and the government and so on, they are there to stand in the middle and to ensure that judgment is made according to the laws of the land. Then they are also responsible for protecting the rights and liberties of citizens. So there are certain fundamental human rights that are entrenched in the Constitution. And when these rights are violated by either the executive or the legislature or even other members of the society, they ensure that the rights of the citizens are protected according to the laws of the land. They also uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. They ensure that the executive and the legislature make and implement laws and policies based on the dictates of the Constitution. When they go beyond the dictates of the Constitution, they have the right to review the actions of the executive and the legislature. They can tell the legislature to repeal such laws. They can tell the executives to stop implementing such policies. So this is how they review the activities of the legislature and the executive as well. They ensure that the laws, the policies that they make are according to the dictates of the Constitution and the rule of law. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the executive in detail. We're going to look at what the executive is all about and how the various institutions that we have here in Nigeria, in post-independence Nigeria. So the executive is the organ of government which gives effect to the will of the state by carrying out and executing the law of the land. So that is their main function, executing the law, implementing the law. So the executive operates at 3 tiers of government. So we discussed Nigeria's federalism in the previous video lesson, and we discussed how the federal structure is divided into the federal, state, and local level. So at these 3 different levels, the executive is duplicated. So at the federal level, the executive consists of the president, the vice president, the federal executive council, ministries, departments, agencies, and so on. We're going to discuss all of these different institutions in the coming slides. Then at the state level, the executive consists of the governors, the deputy governors, the state executive councils, the state ministries, departments, agencies, and so on. And then at the local level, it consists of the chairman, the supervisory councillors, and the local departments. So this is how functions are duplicated among the various levels, the various tiers of governments. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the executive at the federal, at the national level. So the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, the head of state and government, is known as the president. So Nigeria practices a presidential system of government. This means that the president has both ceremonial functions and executive functions. He is both head of state and head of government. He is also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. So he is in charge of the Navy, the Air Force. So he's elected by popular votes for a renewable 4-year term, a maximum of 2 terms. So for our Nigerian society, our president is accountable to the people and not to the legislature, because we are practicing a presidential system of government. We have a presidential republic. So when the president is elected, he's accountable to the people. And so he's allowed to stay in office for a 4-year term, again, because this is a republic. You elect the leader, and the leader stays for a specific period of time. So after that 4-year term, he has the ability to be re-elected in a subsequent election. This is if the people still want him to be the leader. So if after a particular term, the people are no longer satisfied with the actions of the leader, the people can choose to elect someone else to take his place. So this is why we practice a presidential republic, to ensure there is accountability in the system. The president must also secure at least 25% of votes in 2/3 of the states, in addition to the majority of total votes cast. So the reason for this addition to the requirements of the presidency is to ensure that majority of the people within the society agree that this leader should lead them. So the fact that 2/3 of the states have to vote for this particular person helps to ensure that the leader is accepted by every tribe, every region within the society. What are the functions of the president? One of the functions include they are responsible for appointing ministers, ambassadors, and heads of agencies with Senate approval. So the ministers, ambassadors, and heads of agencies are part of the executive. And being the chief executive officer, he has the authority to appoint these people to ensure that the policies that he has created at the beginning of his term can be fully implemented by the people that he has put in power. So, of course, this appointment is subject to the approval of the Senate. The upper house of the legislature has to approve all of these appointments before they are allowed to take office. The reason for this is to ensure checks and balances, to ensure accountability within the system. He's also responsible for chairing the Federal Executive Council. So the Federal Executive Council is made up of the ministers that he has appointed. These various ministers head the various departments in the executive, and they help to ensure the smooth day-to-day operation of government. So he chairs the Federal Executive Council to ensure that the policies he has created are implemented within the society. He also commands the military and security forces to help defend against external aggression and to help to maintain law and order within the country. He also represents Nigeria in international relations. So when it comes to foreign policies, when it comes to meetings with other nations of the world, other leaders from other nations of the world, he has that responsibility to represent the country adequately. So this is one of his functions as head of state. He also signs bills into laws or vetoes them. So when the legislature passes laws, he has the responsibility to sign the bill into law. If he doesn't sign it, it doesn't become a law, except if 2/3 majority of the legislature decides to sign that bill into law. So this is one of his responsibilities, again, helps to ensure checks and balances within the society. He also has the responsibility to declare a state of emergency when necessary. So when he feels like the security of the state is being threatened, he has the power to declare a state of emergency, whether in a particular region within the country or in the entire nation. He also presents the annual budget proposal to the National Assembly. In order to be able to implement policies, he has to have enough revenue, enough resources necessary to implement those policies, and he doesn't have the power of the purse. It is the legislature who has the power of the purse, and without their approval, he cannot implement those policies. So he has to present an annual budget for the legislature to review. He also oversees all federal executive functions. Anything that has to do with day-to-day operations of government is under the purview of the president. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the vice president. So the vice president is the second highest executive officer. So he's elected on the same ticket as the president. This means that before the primary election, before the election in the country, the president has to choose his own vice president, and they have to be elected on the same tickets. So the president, along with the vice president, they are elected together by the people. So the vice president acts as president in the absence or incapacitation of the president. We saw that under the term of Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, when he was actually absent from the country due to health reasons. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan took over, and then when he died, he had to take over as acting president of the country. So this is one of the duties of the vice president, to act as president in the absence or incapacitation of the president. He also chairs certain national councils, for example, the National Economic Council. So this is a very important institution of government under the executive arm. We're going to discuss that later. So it is the vice president who chairs the National Economic Council. He also plays advisory representational roles, often overseeing specific national initiatives. So there are certain roles that the president assigns to the vice president, and so he has to act in the capacity of the president in those roles. Then the Federal Executive Council is also another institution that is under the executive. So it is also known as the cabinet. It's a body that helps the president execute government policies, and according to Ministers' Statutory Powers and Duties Act, they serve as an advisory body to the president of Nigeria. So the Federal Executive Council, they often come together, they meet together to discuss how to implement certain policies within society. And so membership of this Federal Executive Council includes the president himself, who is the chairman of the council, the vice president, the ministers of the federation, that means the ministers of all the different ministries within the country, the secretary general to the government of the federation, the head of the civil service of the federation, and special advisors and other top appointees. So these are all the members of the Federal Executive Council. So remember, they have advisory role. They advise the president on how to implement policies within the society. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the National Security Council. This is another institution of government. It is established under Section 25 of the third schedule of the 1999 Constitution. So the council consists of the president, the vice president, the secretary to the government of the federation, the minister of defense, the minister of interior, ministry of foreign affairs, national security advisor, chief of defense staff, service chiefs, and inspector general of police. So all of these various offices are members of the National Security Council. They are responsible for advising the president on matters relating to public security, internal security, intelligence, threat assessment, and military readiness. So everything related to the security of the nation, whether external or internal, it is the duty of this council to advise the president on what to do. For example, if there is a need to declare a state of emergency in the country due to maybe there is a prevailing situation in society, it is the National Security Council that advises the president on whether or not the state of emergency is actually necessary. Then we also have the National Defense Council, the NDC, which is established under Section 135 and Part 1 of the third schedule of the Constitution. So it consists of the president, the vice president, the minister of defense, the chief of defense staff, chiefs of army, navy, and air force, and national security advisor. So they are responsible for advising the president on defense policy, military strategy, deployment, and use of the armed forces. So the difference between the National Defense Council and the National Security Council is that while the National Defense Council is strictly focused on military and defense matters, the NSC, or the National Security Council, also has to deal with issues relating to internal and police security. So this is the difference. For the National Defense Council, they deal with defense of the country, the defense of the nation, while the National Security Council deals with threats, both internally and externally. So that's the difference between these two councils. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the Council of States. The Council of States is another institution of government under the executive. It was established under Section 153, subsection 1, and third schedule, part 1 of the 1999 Constitution. So the council is composed of past and present top national leaders, including the president, the vice president, all former presidents and head of states, all former chief justices of Nigeria, Senate president, speaker of the House of Representatives, state governors, and attorney general of the federation. So you can see a lot of past presidents, past head of states, past chief justices in this council. So what they do is that they advise the president on national population census matters, prerogative of mercy, national honors and awards, INEC, the Judicial Service Commission, and the Federal Civil Service Commission appointments. So what they do is they advise the president. They are there on an advisory capacity. So the council's advice is not binding. It only carries moral and political weights. So what they are doing is they are essentially guiding the president on what to do based on their own past experiences as leaders of the nation. They just offer the president insights on how to handle various issues within the country. Then we also have the National Economic Council, which is established under Section 153, subsection 1, and third schedule, part 1, subsection 18 of the 1999 Constitution. So the council comprises the vice president, all the state governors, the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Budget and National Planning, and other appointed by the president. So what they do is that they advise the president on economic affairs of the federation. So anything relating to economic issues, economic policies, it is the responsibility of this council to advise the president. So you can see that all state governors are members of this council. The reason for this is that they have to all come together to discuss how to move the country forward based on the resources that are available in each of the states and based on the capacity that they can provide to help to improve the economic situation. The governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria is also there, and the Minister of Finance, Minister of Budget and National Planning. So they all coordinate economic planning and policy between the federal and the state governments. Now let's move on to the next slide. Right now we're going to discuss the federal ministries. So Nigeria has over 25 ministries, and each ministry is headed by a minister. So the president nominates the ministers and submits the list to the Senate for approval. Section 147, subsection 6 of the Nigerian Constitution gives the Senate 21 days to complete the screening for confirmation or rejection by a simple majority. So what happens is that the president submits this list of ministers that he has appointed to the Senate, and then within 21 days, the Senate will call each of these various ministers to come before the Senate to discuss how they plan to perform their duties when they get into power. And so after the screening, they can decide to either approve the list or reject the list. And this decision is made by a simple majority. That means once more than half of the population of the Senate approves such minister, the minister is allowed to take office. So each minister may be assisted by one or more minister of states. By ministers of state, we mean those commissioners who head the various ministries at the state level. So the minister at the federal level can choose to appoint one or more of these ministers to help to perform his functions. So they are responsible for policy formulation and supervision in their respective sectors. So there are various sectors. We have health, finance, justice, so many of these different ministries. So each of these ministers are responsible for the formulation of policies and the supervision of the implementation of these policies under their ministry. So the ministries are led by an administrative head called a permanent secretary. So while the minister is a political head, the permanent secretary is the administrative head. He is the one who actually does the day-to-day operation within the ministry. So he's appointed by the head of the civil service and is accountable to a minister and responsible for implementing the policies that have been formulated by the ministers. So each of the ministries are populated by civil servants who are responsible for day-to-day operation and the implementation of the formulated policies. Now let's move on to the next slide. Right now, we're going to look at some of the examples of federal ministries in the country. We have the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Petroleum Resources, Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, Ministry of Sports Development, Ministry of Arts, Culture and Creative Economy, Ministry of Information and National Orientation, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, Ministry of Power, Ministry of Aviation, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and so on. We have about 25 ministries within the country. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss federal departments, agencies, and parastatals. So these are administrative subunits within ministries that handle specific areas. The ministries are responsible for these bodies, including the federal universities, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, the NNPC, the National Broadcasting Commission, and so on. So each of these departments, agencies, or parastatals, they are under the various ministries we have. And so it is the ministries that are responsible for overseeing the affairs of these various departments, these various agencies and parastatals. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, for example, is under the Ministry of Petroleum. So they usually answer to the Minister of Petroleum Resources. However, some of these bodies are under the exclusive supervision of the Office of the Presidency. So examples of these bodies include the Independent National Electoral Commission, which is a commission within the country that is under the purview of the Office of the Presidency. That means they answer directly to the President, and it is the President who appoints the chairman of the INEC. Then we also have EFCC, the Economic and Financial Crime Commission, and the Federal Civil Service Commission. All of these commissions are under the Presidency. It is the President who appoints the leaders and who oversees the activities of these different bodies. So some other major federal agencies include the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, or FAN, the Nigerian Television Authority, or NTA, the Central Bank of Nigeria, or CBN, the Corporate Affairs Commission, CAC, and the Joint Admission and Matriculation Board, or JAMB. These are all federal agencies and they are under the purview of the different ministries within the country. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to look at a case study of the Independent National Electoral Commission to see how they perform their day-to-day functions. We'll also look at their origin, how they have evolved over the years. So the Independent National Electoral Commission is the electoral body in Nigeria responsible for conducting and supervising all elections to the office of the President and Vice President, the Governor and Deputy Governors, members of the National Assembly, and members of the state houses of assembly. It's important to note that it is not all elections in the country that are conducted by INEC. Local government elections, for example, are conducted by the states' electoral commissions, the electoral commissions in each of the various states of the Federation. So it is an independent statutory body established by law to ensure that elections in Nigeria are free, fair, and credible. However, there is a debate about whether it is truly independent, with the fact that the INEC is still under the purview of the Office of the Presidency. So it derives its power from Section 153 and the third section of the 1999 Constitution and the Electoral Act. So it is the Electoral Act that brought INEC into being. Remember, we talked about how certain public operations, departments, agencies, and parastatals are brought into being by acts of parliament, by legislation. So it is the Electoral Act that brought INEC into being. It is also under 1999 Constitution. There are certain dictates within the 1999 Constitution that talks about how this body should conduct elections within the country. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, here is the history of INEC. So INEC is a very recent commission. Before INEC was introduced, there were so many other electoral commissions that were introduced within the country. So between 1958 and 1959, we had the Electoral Commission of Nigeria. They were the ones responsible for conducting the election for the leaders that were elected for our independence country. Then between 1960 and 1966, it was the Federal Electoral Commission that was responsible for conducting the election. Then after the regime of Olusegun Obasanjo, when Nigeria was about to transition into the Second Republic, the Federal Electoral Commission, FEDECO, was created. And so they were the ones who conducted the election that brought in President Shehu Shagari. Then between 1987 and 1993, a new electoral commission was created, the National Electoral Commission, or NEC. So it was created under the regime of Ibrahim Babangida, when it was about to conduct the election between Bashir Tofa and MK Abiola. However, this election was annulled. Then between 1995 and 1998, the National Electoral Commission of Nigeria, or NECON, was created, and this was under the regime of General Sani Abacha. So during that time, the NECON was created, and then there were 5 different political parties that were under the control of Sani Abacha. So this did not last long. However, under General Abdulsalami Abubakar in 1998, the Independent National Electoral Commission was created to conduct the first election for the Fourth Republic. It was that election that brought Olusegun Obasanjo to become the first president of the Fourth Republic. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the functions of INEC. INEC is responsible for the conduct of election. That is their primary function. They conduct election. They are also responsible for voter registration. That means they compile, they maintain and update the National Register of Voters and issue permanent voters card or PVCs to eligible voters. They are also responsible for the regulation of political parties. So they monitor political parties to ensure compliance with the Constitution and Electoral Acts and register new parties that meet requirements. So when the political parties that are trying to be established do not meet any of the requirements from the Constitution or the Electoral Act, they do not register them to become official political parties in the country. They are also responsible for voter education. That means they promote awareness of electoral processes through voter education campaign. And they are also responsible for election logistics. They procure and distribute election materials such as ballot papers, BVAS machines, and so on. They are responsible for results declaration. That means they supervise polling, collation, and announcements of results and declare the winners in elections. Then, lastly, they are responsible for boundary delimitation. So they delimit constituencies and polling units to reflect population changes. So it is the duty of INEC to ensure that the constituencies are divided based on equality of population. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss another case study, the Economic and Financial Crime Commission, or EFCC. So the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission is Nigeria's foremost anti-graft agency. So in the early 2000s, Nigeria faced intense criticism for being a hub for internet fraud, or what has come to be known as Yahoo Yahoo. Also advanced fee fraud, or 419 scams, and money laundering. So it is because of all of this criticism of Nigeria being a hub for these various fraudulent activities that the EFCC came into being. So the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, which is an intergovernmental body combating money laundering, listed Nigeria among non-cooperative countries. So the FATF is an international body. it comprises of agents from different countries of the world coming together to discuss how to resolve or reduce money laundering among the various nations of the world. And so they listed Nigeria as one of the non-cooperative countries that were not willing to comply with some of the regulations that are being created by this task force. And as a result of that, EFCC had to be created in order to avoid economic sanctions and to restore investor confidence. The Nigerian government enacted the EFCC Establishment Act in 2002, which was later amended in 2004. So the commission became operational in 2003, and Malam Nuhu Ribadu was appointed as the pioneer chairman of this new commission. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, what are the functions of the EFCC? One of the functions is the investigation of financial crimes. So they investigate internet fraud, money laundering, bank fraud, and capital market fraud. So any issue related to fraud and economic issues are investigated by the EFCC. They also enforce relevant laws. EFCC enforces laws like the Money Laundering Prohibition Act, the Advanced Fee Fraud Act, and other related statutes. They are also responsible for prosecuting offenders. EFCC prosecutes individuals and corporate bodies involved in corruption and financial crimes through the Federal High Courts. So when we talk about prosecution, they do not mean that they are the ones who adjudicate cases. They are the ones who defend the states against people who commit these crimes. So they have prosecutors in the courts who help to defend the laws of the land, while the judge is the one who eventually determines whether the person is innocent or guilty. So the FCC doesn't have the authority to determine innocence or guilt. They only have the right to present the evidence before the courts of law based on the established laws of the land. They're also responsible for asset recovery and forfeiture. So they identify, freeze, confiscate, and return proceeds of crime to the rightful owners or the governments. They also collaborate with other agencies. They work with the Nigerian Police Force, the ICPC, the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission, the NFIU, the Interpol, and other bodies to ensure that some of these laws are being implemented and to ensure that people who commit financial crimes are brought to book. They're also responsible for public enlightenment. They engage in sensitization campaigns to educate Nigerians on the dangers of corruption and fraud. We see a lot of that through social media campaigns. They actually go out there to educate people on the dangers of corruption and fraud, the actual punitive measures that are given to people who engage in such activities. So now we've come to the end of this segment of the video lesson. I believe it was educative and enlightening. If you would like to continue on this journey with us, please go down to the link in the description below. This takes you to the My School website where you can subscribe for the government topic by topic video lesson. There we're going to move on to the various institutions of governments in the executive at the state and local level. Then we're going to move on to the legislature and the judiciary. I hope to see you there. I believe you're enjoying this content. If yes, please don't forget to hit the like button, click on the subscribe button, and lastly, tap on the notification bell to get informed as soon as we release next videos.